Hello. Welcome. ACMI would like to acknowledge the traditional custodians of the lands and waterways of Greater Melbourne, the people of the Kulin Nation, and recognise that ACMI is located on the lands of the Wurundjeri people. Well, welcome to day 4 of Godzilla Fest. My name's Silvi Van War. I'm a film critic, writer, lover of movies in general. Today we're talking about Godzilla as a global pop culture icon. And with me today, I have Emma Westwood. Emma is a cinema historian, former Triple R radio host, and author of several books about film, including one called Monster Movies, very appropriate. Andrew Lynch in the middle there. Andrew's a lecturer in cinema and screen studies at Swinburne University and the author of Quality Telefantasy, How the US brought quality TV, how US quality TV brought zombies, dragons, and androids into the mainstream. And on the end, we have Megan McHugh. Megan is a community radio presenter and pop culture enthusiast with a deep love of all things film, TV, and gaming. And she currently co-hosts Triple R's show, Zero G. Welcome, guys. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Now, I'm going to start off with asking you all what your first introduction to Godzilla was and what impression you got from Godzilla.
Start with me.
Go for it.
I feel like I can't actually remember what my first viewing of Godzilla was. I think that we were talking about this beforehand. Everyone here, I'm making a judgment call on this, will have been alive since Godzilla was released onto the earth in 1954. So that means that we all grew up to a certain extent just having Godzilla part of our lives. It would be interesting to talk to someone who didn't have that and who could remember when Godzilla was introduced. But so for me, it was, I think that, it was, I'll pick a moment that was interesting to me, and it was the 1998 Godzilla, the much maligned Zilla film. I was actually in New York. I was studying at the time when it came out, and I got to see that film in a cinema off 14th Street in New York, and with a New York audience. And I found that in a really kind of bizarre parallel world, it was like watching the first Godzilla with a Japanese audience, but in this case I was watching it with New York audience that was claiming it as their own, attacking their own city. So at the start of that film, it comes up with the city that never sleeps, right, over the Hudson River, and everyone just cheered and went nuts. And then there was a moment where Godzilla or some creature comes out of the New York subway, the 14th Street subway, and because that was just outside the cinema, everyone started screaming. So that was kind of a formative moment for me, I would say, with Godzilla canon.
Yeah. Andrew?
I'll say, to date myself as well, my 11th birthday, I went to Chadstone with all my friends, and there was the best birthday ever because I got to play video games, eat a lot of popcorn, and watch the 1998 Roland Emmerich film, which also then had, I think at the time, what I thought was like a really cool original song, which I think was like a weird cover of We Can Be Heroes by David Bowie.
Oh, really? I can't remember that.
It was the tie-in, yeah. I found that very important. And I thought, I think I didn't quite realise, but I loved all the performers. I think because so many of them did voices in The Simpsons. So I thought Hank Azaria being like a kind of a real like New York cabbie and Harry Shearer being Mr. Burns and stuff. So I think that otherwise we were just talking about it before, but I think the first time I saw something that resembled Godzilla, I didn't even realise, which was Reptar in Rugrats, which is that kind of animated universe's version of Godzilla, a kind of child-appropriate one. So I think that was probably my first actual introduction, even if I didn't know it.
Mm-hmm. So for me, like all people who sort of were growing up and came of age in the 90s, I came across most cultural touchstones via The Simpsons, which you've already referenced. Things like The Shining. And I'll be honest, the first time I saw Godzilla probably was the 30 Minutes Over Tokyo episode of The Simpsons. Came out in the 1999, so straight off the back of the Roland Emmerich, as you mentioned, panned film. But I don't think we should ever underestimate like the cultural power of The Simpsons and how much it has done to ingrain things in the cultural mindset, especially around that time where we still had a shared cultural mainstream. So I think that, I mean, and Matt Groening is famously a big Godzilla fan, and there's about 15, I think I saw 15 references to Godzilla in the first 13 good episodes of this seasons of The Simpsons. And so I think, you know, growing up as a Simpsons watcher, that was probably actually my first, my first exposure to Godzilla. Same as I will never watch The Shining without thinking about the blood getting off at the second floor. Like, I think it's just, it does something to the young brain in the 90s kid.
Yeah. It's very interesting. Yeah, my first intro to Godzilla was also the 1998 film. I was 7. I don't think I saw it in cinemas, but I remember just like knowing about it. And I think there were so many ads and tie-in toys and possibly songs as well that it just sort of like got absorbed by me. Like it was just everywhere in pop culture. And I think there was either a KFC or Red Rooster tie-in toy, which was a hand puppet of Godzilla's head, and I got one of those, and I just remember being in the back seat of the car biting my sister. Like, you know, and my impression was that this is awesome because I was a kid, and I think something about Godzilla appeals to kids, but maybe we can expand on that. Why does that resonate?
You go first.
I was just going to say off the back of what you were saying about the Godzilla film in 1998, like I think what's important to remember around that time in cinema, like the late 90s, was the peak of like disaster movies. That was when Independence Day came out. We also had the sequel to Jurassic Park, which is famously inspired by Godzilla, like Spielberg's very into Godzilla. So we were primed for that because The Lost World came out in the late 90s. And then also we have things like, it was the famous Deep Impact Armageddon. No, we didn't poach off each other, but we managed to release the same movie around the same time. So audiences are very into this whole ordinary person in an extraordinary situation and watching like a spectacle of destruction. So I think Godzilla swooped in and it took the kind of mindset of being a disaster movie with humans triumphing. And I think that's what kind of appealed and started really soaking into kids of that age wanting to play act, because no kids in their room pretending to be the weary but determined scientist trying to stop the rampage through the city. They're pretending to be Godzilla. So I think that's part of it. And then, you know, it just picks up like a cultural tumbleweed.
Yeah, I think that the childhood fascination with monsters just happens because kids in themselves, like, you know, they're amongst big creatures which are adults all around you. You don't have a lot of agency over your life. You're told what to do. And it appeals to the anarchic spirit in all of us. So for kids to go, yeah, like there's a monster that's just, you know, stomping on things and wrecking stuff and
making a mess.
Making a mess is pretty exciting. So it plays into that rebel aspect of us all, and the fact that he's you know, the outsider, or he, she, it, them. The monsters are outsiders. They're not of this world, and they're brought into this world, and they're usually not of their own asking, which is us as people. When we don't ask to be born, we just find ourselves here.
If someone detonated a hydrogen bomb in my room, I'm sure I'd be pretty cranky as well.
Yes, yeah.
I mean, we all felt that before, though. We still have that kind of, like, you know, spirit of play. I mean, we all flocked to the little mock up there to pretend to destroy a city and things like that. So that kind of visceral pleasure of making a mess is still, I think, kind of a part of us.
Yeah, absolutely. But, you know, I think Godzilla started not being of, you know, for children as such.
Very much so, yeah.
Yeah, so it was more like the idea that that's developed out of, that's the iconography, that's the image and the role that Godzilla may play in today's society, or has eventually happened over the years, because the first film just comes from a place of incredible trauma and
It's
incredible
tragic. It's a
sadness.
tragic film,
Yeah,
yeah.
incredible sadness.
Yeah. Now I'm holding a little Godzilla pop vinyl figure here, and I can see in the audience there's figurines. Very cool, yes. And there's Mothra plushies. There's shirts. So I think it would be really good to segue into Godzilla as a commodity. How did we get to that point? Why is it desirable to play with Godzilla, to have him on your shirt? He's a destroyer of cities, so how did that happen?
I think there's something to be said for like the combination of an iconic silhouette, so his design, so the fact you need so little visually to give off the impression, plus the scale, so, you know, big Godzilla, little city.
Yep.
And I think that the design is just appealing. Like, I think we all love a pop of color. So, you know, anything that has the neon spines and things like that. And I do think there's something to be said for his scale and the fact that despite his scale and destruction, there's something, and I think I've been very much influenced by the US portrayal of Godzilla, which makes him more of a protector, chaotic neutral rather than an antagonist. But there's something you see in him that you can relate to. Like, I think maybe you were saying about that base instinct of, but I think that that's what kind of makes him so iconic and something you want to, makes him a collectible. And there's so many variations as well. Like even in, Emma brought before some little figurine. There's so many different variations through the years, like 70 years worth of design.
I've got Mecha Godzilla as well.
Like
A really tiny one, but that's...
We were playing around with the Godzilla advent calendar before coming on here, coming on stage here. And so, you know, yeah, Godzilla, I think that you're completely right there, Megan. And the fact that he's like a dinosaur, you know, as well. I mean, there's a familiarity in dinosaurs as well that, you know, but the dinosaur that's of us, that kind of is of our age, that we can own as such.
You mentioned the design, which is, I think is really key to Godzilla as well. So in talking about how we recognize Godzilla outside of Godzilla films, what are the elements that clue us into something being a reference or an homage to Godzilla? Because there are so many. There's Simpsons, Rugrats, Austin Powers, and then those are just the parodies. And then there's the actual films that, you know, quite seriously pay homage to Godzilla and the other kaijus. What are the elements of Godzilla? Let's sort of break him down and talk about, you know, would we recognize him if it was just the tail? Like, what sort of things do we need?
I think that something that plays out to me with Godzilla is this idea of, and this is like the dinosaur in modern day, if you know what I mean, with the train in his mouth, like a string of sausages, right?
Like link sausages for a dog?
Yeah. So that always says to me, if I see that sort of image in things, that says Godzilla to me.
I'd say definitely the scale thing again, like the 1999, I think it was, cartoon, maybe it was earlier, 1960, cartoon Bambi meets Godzilla would argue that all you need is the foot. And I think the scale goes so far, like most of the parodies you mentioned and things like Shrek, it's really just a large thing that's outsized, destroying little things.
Yeah.
And that's enough to point to, don't tell Toho that, they'll start like copywriting everything. But like I think that's all you need.
Yeah, but ironically, we've been playing with tiny, tiny monsters today.
We are the Godzilla in their eyes.
I think there's something to be said, though, that, as you say, like Godzilla becomes representative of the kaiju genre in general, right? Like he's predated by Western or American monster movies, things like, you know, the giant Frankenstein film, we get them, the giant ants and things like that. But, you know, between him and what would later be Ultraman, like that sort of starts the kaiju genre in Japan. And I think certainly outside of Japan, like Godzilla is the most iconic and recognizable of any of those monsters. I mean, even in the Godzilla franchise, there's all sorts of beasties that we might see across one film and they get destroyed. But we couldn't recognize a couple of the ones that we saw in the little advent calendar we were playing with. So I think because he's in the same way that, you know, Superman is an iconic representation of all superheroes as a genre, Godzilla has become the kind of de facto generic mascot of city destruction, even more so than anything else. But I will say his big bum, I think, is an important and iconic part of him. I think.
I agree.
Yeah, every time they change the design, the thing that gets fans grumpy is if we have kind of too muscular a Godzilla, too svelte a Godzilla. It's as long as he's got a big,
Little head, big bum.
yeah, and little arms, right? Like he still has to be his lumbering quality, I think, has remained one of his most iconic kind of qualities.
When
over
will
the
these
years.
unrealistic beauty standards end?
Yeah, he became this
Godzilla
body
bee.
positivity meme, especially around the legendary release in 2014, that the Americans had done it right this time because they had a big chonky Godzilla. Godzilla was thick, yeah.
And what about the roar? That's surely
The Raw is absolutely amazing. It's so multi-dimensional. I mean, the 1954 Raw was, interestingly enough, was actually designed by the composer of the film. So you often don't have the composer or someone who's doing a soundtrack do sound design as well. And he was also in charge of the footfalls and the footsteps and everything. But I think in some ways that maybe because it completes the experience, you have the composers informed by much more by what he's done with the voice and everything, that it just makes it fabulous.
Yeah, and fun fact, if you weren't aware, the original roar was made by someone's hand in a glove covered in tar, I think
rubbing
on the strings of a double bass. So yeah, very
All the
iconic.
art is amazing.
But how do you get to that? I don't know how, you're playing with tar at home and a double bass.
Yeah.
I'm not.
Foley out of some Miracle Makers.
I think the newer Godzilla sound that they redid for 2014, Gareth Edwards' Godzilla, is like metal sheets that are cooled with dry ice, and then it makes this like screaming sound.
It has quite a metallic quality.
Science.
Yeah.
I think I was rewatching the first Godzilla, Honda's 1954 movie the other day, and I think I'd forgotten that the opening titles are literally just the Godzilla theme and just a repeated roar. And I had my speakers turned up really loud. I'm like, this is genuinely affecting. It was the first time in quite a while I'd been kind of frightened by that sound. I think in a way that probably I hadn't thought of in the same way since the Jurassic Park T-Rex, which obviously owes a lot, its kind of semi-metallic roar to Godzilla.
Yeah, great opportunity to segue into like the line of influence and references upon references. But yeah, I love that opening too, especially the footsteps as well. There's the big booming footsteps. And yes, Spielberg did indeed get inspired by that in Jurassic Park. And then Godzilla films also got inspired by quite a few of Spielberg's films. I was watching one the other day from the 90s, which has an extended sequence that is a direct ripoff of Indiana Jones, like a shameless ripoff. Very funny. And I also saw a lot of Jaws influence in Godzilla -1, with the three guys being in the fishing boat, being chased by something with big teeth.
Absolutely. and shooting at it, and the actual barrels having to come up. That idea, that was such a strong image from Jaws.
We almost should have someone saying we need a bigger boat.
Exactly.
Yeah.
That's what I was thinking too at the time.
So can we talk about our favourite films that have been influenced
Where do
by
we
Godzilla?
start?
Yeah.
I mean, Emma, do you want to kick off with one of your faves?
All right. I'm just trying. I've actually written them down so I don't forget them. One that I'll just pick out because it is a really most overt reference to Godzilla is Cloverfield, which was 2007. That was directed by Matt Reeves and written by Drew Goddard, who's, all J.J. Abrams' crew, basically. And that was seen as a 9/11 response, basically. So this idea that you've got, Japan had Godzilla to deal with their trauma. Let's create a monster that attacks New York so that can represent our trauma and for us to, deal with it and work through all of that. So, but the idea was this was a found footage film. So I like the approach that it took, this idea of, documenting it or capturing the creature through on-the-ground surveillance, through mobile phones and everything. So it meant that you weren't seeing a lot of the creature. So he did that on purpose because the idea was not to have those panoramic shots where you get, and that's such a thing about Godzilla, you get to see all of Godzilla, Godzilla doesn't, there's no hiding, but there is, if you are in that frenzy of that moment and you don't know what's going on and the attack, and which was no doubt what people were feeling on the day when those attacks on the World Trade Center occurred, you're going to be confused and it's going to be a mess, and there's going to be, you're not seeing things clearly, including the monster. But in that, he gave the monster these little parasites, that kind of dropped off, and it was like the monster was almost like a aircraft carrier that then dropped off the troops on the ground. But that's one that really stands out to me.
Can I cheat a little bit and say a TV show?
Sure,
Absolutely.
of course, yeah.
Because I think Neon Genesis Evangelion, which is a popular anime series from the 1990s, which would go on to have a number of feature films, and is sort of a play between the kaiju and the mecha genres. It's people in big robots that turn out to be monsters fighting other big monsters. And of course, Hideaki Anno would go on to co-direct Shin Godzilla, which was the sort of Japanese reboot response, a kind of prestigious response to the new Legendary films, to say, we still have kind of cultural ownership over this product. And I think I love that it just kind of imagines how it blends the kaiju and the mecha genres, which are distinct kind of cultural objects in Japan, but it also imagines a kind of future that is almost a response to a world of giant monsters. And one of my favorite things is it imagines a Tokyo that can survive the kind of destruction that we see. So it's a Tokyo that inverts itself, via pneumatics and goes into the ground and is thus, protected. The people are protected and are not collateral damage in the same kind of way. But I think it plays with so much of the themes of Godzilla, and it's a kind of truly Japanese cultural response. And no wonder that I think still my favorite by far Japanese Godzilla film is Shin Godzilla, because of the way it kind of playfully mixes a lot of those influences.
I might cheat. I'm going to mention two that I know that everyone...
We're all cheating.
So the first one is definitely... I think these two films use Godzilla as kind of an allegory for some kind of bigger message they want to share. So the first one I want to mention is The Host by Bong Joon-ho. Really amazing monster movie. Obviously, the monster in that is a much smaller scale to Godzilla. And he looks a lot... He's like gross. He's disgusting. He's like slimy and sloppy. And he kind of reminds me a lot of the Shin Godzilla, one of the early iterations of Godzilla in Shin Godzilla with the huge eyes. It's like kind of slimy.
In that film, for anyone who sees it, Godzilla starts smaller and kind of
He
mutates
evolves,
over the course of the film into a recognisable form.
And in The Host, I think I'd say that's actually a family drama first and a social commentary first, and then a monster movie second. But obviously, Bong Joon-ho is amazing. So he's melded them perfectly. And I think using that monster as a metaphor for, the triumph of humanity and the underdog working together to overcome some great adversity. And, kind of how a loss of faith in the military bureaucracy and everything that led them there, as well as an underlying environmental message. So that's a lot to pack in. So they take a bit of a shortcut by capitalizing on some of the existing monster metaphors that we're already familiar with to kind of get a bit further in the amount of time that he has in that film. Definitely recommend that one. And I think the second one is Colossal, which is maybe a lesser known film, and it's got Anne Hathaway and Jason Sudeikis in it. It's a black comedy. It actually skews much more black towards the end, but it uses the metaphor of Godzilla, which is very specifically not Godzilla. The design is Godzilla-esque, and it also includes the city of Seoul rather than the city of Tokyo, which I think is a copyright dodge. And it's much more about Anne Hathaway's character's struggle with substance abuse, namely alcoholism, and it's kind of this duality of her blackouts manifest as her as this giant creature who's rampaging through Seoul. So it's very much the monster within, and they don't take the metaphor too much further, but I think it's a really interesting use of a cultural touchstone that we know familiarly very well, and just slotting that in to kind of portray what someone else has going on within. And they don't interrogate it too much in that film, but I think it's a really interesting use of the Godzilla trope.
I have to say that's one of my favourite. I absolutely love that film. And the more that I've watched it, the more that I get from it and like it. But I especially like this as Godzilla has grown across the years, this idea of having to reinterpret Godzilla in different ways. So I like the way that this movie is not a Godzilla film, but takes so much from Godzilla, and also in the way that Godzilla is about destruction and the external forces that are put on us, the man-made stuff that can kill us, like nuclear weaponry and so forth. And Colossal, as Megan was saying, is it's about internal struggles and your internal darkness, and also domestic violence. And it manages to do that in such a clever way. So I really enjoy those kind of films that draw on the legacy of Godzilla in clever moulding of bits and bobs.
Because Godzilla and kaiju films generally aren't usually about, they're not very personal. They might have a little personal backdrop, or but they're usually about bigger, broader, cultural or national or systemic issues or themes, rather than something so kind of small scale and personal. So I think that's certainly the most original. All these other ones, or films of different nations and times, still work in that basic format that Honda started in 1954 of critiquing the country, the people, the government, the systems. But that's a really different kind of way to use this kind of iconography.
Yeah.
There's another one that I wanted to point out. It's not probably the first one you'd think of when you think of Godzilla, but it's The Mist, the Frank Darabont film.
Ooh, I want to hear your take.
Yeah, so I just saw that as the parallels being this idea with, the kaiju in this film. They're not called kaiju, but they are big things that are shrouded in mist and sort of, ushered in with the mist. And that kind of has a lot of parallels, I think, with this idea of nuclear fallout and, what's in the cloud, what's hidden in the cloud, and the radiation and what's all around you that you can't see. So basically the monsters in this film are from parallel universes. They're actually extra dimensions, so they're actually all around us as we speak. But in this case, a hole gets punched into our dimension, and they get to slip through that hole and come into this world of where the mist is set. And that one similarly plays with not quite as internalized as internal motions as Colossal, but still plays with this idea of people relationships. It's a small town. What happens in these circumstances, these traumatic circumstances where you're being attacked by big creatures? And in this case, being very American as well, it was this Christian fundamentalism came out, and how people started grappling with with their theology, basically, at a time of trauma and at a time of great distress, but also turned on each other, and how it wasn't about coming together to save each other. It was about survival of the fittest in some ways. So that's where I
fatalistic film as well. For anyone who hasn't seen it, a small town is largely trapped inside a convenience store with this mist and these monsters outside and turn on one another. But that's got one of the darkest endings of any of these films, which we shan't be mentioning here. But it takes a pretty... Most of these films that we've been talking about do have some sort of hopeful message about overcoming, of collectivism, of something like that. The monster can be defeated, and this film definitely does not.
No, it doesn't. In fact, it's based on, as most of Frank Darabont's stuff is based on a Stephen King story. But I believe the ending, you guys might be able to clarify, it was... I believe the ending was actually rewritten for the film, so I have no idea what the Stephen King ending was like, but this is one of the most powerful, full-on, amazing endings in cinema, so I'd recommend...
It's funny how they were like, Stephen King, he did okay, but let's go darker for this.
Yeah.
Like,
too hopeful.
This is, it's pretty amazing.
We're probably talking around this. It's it's certainly not child appropriate. So, but it's a great movie if anyone hasn't checked it out.
Yeah. All right. I'm gonna hold the idea of everything we've just been talking about, using monsters as metaphors, which we will go into in our later talk this afternoon, but I will touch on it. Also, just before I do, because we're at the halfway mark, I'll just remind everyone you can send in your own questions via the QR codes. So if you've got a burning question you want to ask the panel, send it through. I'll be able to read it. And we'll have maybe 10-15 minutes at the end to look through those.
Please do.
Yes. Now back to Godzilla. So, we know that Godzilla is used as a metaphor for things that are usually pretty dark, and the first film is one of the darkest. His death is also treated as a tragedy in that film. But now we're at a point where Godzilla is a cultural tourism ambassador for Japan. He also has a star on the Hollywood Walk of Fame, and I looked into this. King Kong does not, which is really fascinating to me.
That is actually criminal.
Right?
Justice for Kong.
Because it's the US. So why did the US put a star for Godzilla? I mean, he is the only monster on the Walk of Fame as well, unless you count Shrek. Maybe.
See, I think, that's interesting. Maybe, I'm not sure why that is the case, because I'd say that the most influential monsters in storytelling are Dracula, Frankenstein, King Kong, and Godzilla. So Godzilla being the youngest of all of those, but also Kong and Godzilla both being created for cinema, specifically for cinema. So Frankenstein and Dracula came from literary sources, of course. But I would think that, it's interesting how Godzilla has been reappropriated through parody, and I think that happens with anything that starts with a big impact, often a very alarming, distressing impact. Like people who saw the first Frankenstein film felt like, distressed, scared by Dracula, all of this sort of thing. But then part of the coping in some ways is, part of the healing is to parody something and lampoon it, and then that gives you an ownership. If you can laugh at it as well, you start, you start being able to go, I've conquered this, right?
Yeah. And in a way, Ishiro Honda was probably the first guy to parody Godzilla, and it's his creation, really. You mentioned Frankenstein. I do want to drop in this fact that I learnt, that Godzilla was almost going to fight Frankenstein in a movie. There is a film called Frankenstein Conquers the World by Ishiro Honda, a real film. In it, he fights a kaiju that's very similar, but is not Godzilla. But obviously the Japanese people were enamored with Frankenstein and sort of elevated him to giant kaiju status.
That's really interesting.
Isn't that
he's not that big. He is big.
No, but they
he's not
make
that
him big in the
You've
film.
got to supersize him.
I think there's probably something there about like the empathy that sometimes can be fostered with like Frankenstein's monster and Godzilla. What I've always wondered is like, I feel a lot of affinity towards Godzilla. I'm like, why? He started as an antagonist. Obviously the depictions more of late are much more of him as a protector, maybe a little bit more neutral. I think that probably my theory would be that Godzilla star on the Walk of Fame is not OG Godzilla metaphor for nuclear weapons. It's Godzilla that was in The Simpsons. It's Godzilla that was in Rugrats.
Pop culture icon.
Yeah, it's him that's his star. It's not movie Godzilla, I would argue, and I think that's what Hollywood is patting itself on the back for, is its ownership.
Dropping a bomb on Japan.
Pretty much, but taking what was their property and then really seeping it so heavily into American pop culture over the last couple of decades that they see themselves as having their own ownership over it.
Capitalizing
well.
on it.
Exactly. And then just printing money as they sell toys to, me and everyone else. And I think that's probably what it would be, is if you look at King Kong as a commodity, he's not nearly so much. And I think there's something there about molding his, this great PR for Godzilla that's happened over the years, whereas King Kong is, a US, who's born in it's US property, I think is just viewed a bit differently. So I think that's what's quite interesting about Godzilla. His portrayal is always doing something maybe a bit silly, or there's a juxtaposition against everything he originally stood for. And I think that's what's been part of what's pushed it forward, that light and dark.
Are you saying that Ishiro Honda in 1954 did not imagine that by 1992 he would be selling Nikes and versing Charles Barkley in a fantastic Industrial Light and Magic TV ad, in which at the end I think says the Lakers are looking for another big man.
A big guy, yeah.
Or have you ever considered wearing shoes?
I mean, probably that was kick starts, Then Jurassic Park comes out in 1993, and then the 90s are really like grabbing on. There's like Godzilla figurines in the back of every episode of Roseanne. And back before we knew she was problematic, and in the back of Home Improvement, like I think just little seeps in over the 90s, and probably the Charles Barkley ad was a big part of kicking that off.
But I think like it almost ever since its conception, like Godzilla obviously comes from Japan and has great national and cultural importance.
Yeah.
But it's been a transnational, or he has been a transnational monster almost since his inception, right? So he's very directly inspired by King Kong. Honda sort of said so. And, you know, by 1956, we get the re-edited version of Godzilla King of the Monsters, by director Terry Morse, which adds Raymond Burr as an American reporter. And that also gets a wide release in Japan, and it's extremely successful. I think by some stats, even more so than the original theatrical release.
It's really bizarre. I think people laughed at it though, didn't they?
Well,
They found it a bit funnier because it was
yeah.
because it's if I don't know it possibly people have seen it in this room, but yeah, it just takes the original footage and edits in
Yes.
Raymond Burr, who was Perry Mason at the time,
Yeah.
into the Godzilla, the original Godzilla film as an American journalist.
Yeah. Yeah.
Who is who's basically there at the time and has remarkable access to
Yeah.
the right people. And that. So it's kind of it's a very it's a Frankensteinian film. It's stitched together from and not made at the one time. So singly.
But it is, you know, it's an official Toho co-production. Like, it's not. I mean, it was certainly fairly scathingly reviewed in the US at the time. But it was remarkably popular in Japan, and certainly it only lightly tones down the H-bomb references, the wartime references as well, and so I could see a very understandable place when in 1956, a decade after the end of the war, a film that obliquely references the war might be a lot more palatable than one that, you know, rubs your nose in it, and really, I imagine in 1954 would have been extremely traumatic to watch. So even from those early days, you know, Godzilla is fighting King Kong by 1962.
Yeah.
So it's not like these, and of course now I think of the US and the Japanese Godzillas as quite separate, because they are. Toho has got its Reiwa era, its current run of films, obviously, which includes the fabulous Godzilla -1. Legendary is making its MonsterVerse films, and they're, of course, worlds apart in terms of tone and style. But in the early days, there actually was a lot of, you know, global cooperation and collaboration in the creation of that early iconic Godzilla.
I think I saw they're making another. They're just greenlit.
Yes.
Toho's going to make another with the creators, the people who made Godzilla -1.
Yeah, just yesterday I think they announced that and said
Hot off
it's
the press.
lit.
Yeah.
Godzilla -1's director is on board again.
Yeah.
They haven't released any other info, but there is another film coming.
Yeah.
So very exciting.
I think that film did a lot for Godzilla's rep, because I think I know a lot of people who sort of recommended it or spoke about it just from their interest in watching good films. And I mean, I'm not to say that other Godzilla films aren't good, but I think this Godzilla -1 has come at a point where it's a fantastic film, but culturally people are kind of ready to watch that film, if that makes sense.
Yeah, I think that one also, because the original Godzilla was really around this idea of sacrifice and what, you know, culturally in Japan, you know, the kamikaze pilots, all of this, the idea of sacrificing your life for the greater good was really venerated. Godzilla -1 sort of readdresses that and says, no, you don't have to kill yourself to, you know, save the world or something like that. So I think that it's interesting how it is the growth and the evolution, the change within Japanese society as well is they're using Godzilla to play that out. Yeah.
And that makes a lot of sense. Like, the entire point of the current run of Toho Godzilla films, what's called the Reiwa era from 2016 onwards, is to reinvigorate the kind of importance of Godzilla as a cultural touchstone. For the films before that, the so-called Millennium era, you know, were not some of Toho's finest work. I'm sure they'd even admit that. They were much lower budget. They were often quite tongue-in-cheek, playful. You know, they were not, and they certainly weren't getting the bums in seats.
Yeah. Although, I was quite surprised. I watched Godzilla against Mechagodzilla recently. I was very surprised that it was not only quite good, but that a lot of it gets referenced in Godzilla -1. There's a lone pilot, a female pilot who has lost all of her crew. She's feeling the survivor's guilt, and she has to go up against Godzilla piloting Mechagodzilla, who was actually a mech this time and not just a robot. Yeah, I thought that was really cool.
But it makes sense, and I think -1 has done a lot to, as you say, kind of revitalize, especially internationally. Like Shin Godzilla was the first Japanese film of this reinvigorated era, and that was extremely popular in Japan. And they got one of the anime all-time greats to direct it. It's very funny. It's very satirical. It really pokes fun at Japanese cultural life.
Very anti-bureaucracy.
Absolutely. So you can see, and that was extremely well reviewed. So in Japan, that set the stage. It's like, great, Godzilla's back. We're taking him seriously. He's cool again. And then we have -1, which is, a wonderful film and is, international awards bait. Rightly so.
There's something that we haven't mentioned that I think we should. Pacific Rim. Right. So that, without mentioning Godzilla, is still very incredibly overtly influenced by Godzilla. It does mention kaiju, so it specifically talks about the kaiju.
This is Guillermo del Toro's 2016 film, 2017?
2013.
My lord, it's been an awful long time.
Yes, 2013, then Shape of Water, 2017.
I think Pacific Rim is a fantastic movie, and of course mixes, as you say, it's got the mechs, the mecha genre, but quite westernized. But I love that it's such a childlike movie. It's a movie, of course, it's quite serious, but it's a movie about smashing monster toys together. Like, it doesn't necessarily try for some deep cultural resonance. It's about the kind of the theatre and the play of smashing big monsters together, and it kind of revels in that in a way. I love that movie.
Yeah. I love it as well. I think it also, similarly to something like Skull Island, which is more, Kong, but part of that monsterverse, it focuses on the military side of things. So it's a militarized society in Pacific Rim that has organised, that's worked out a way to deal with the monsters. So is basically make ourselves big monster bodies, but have to be. I like the twist on it is that idea that you have to have two people who are, mentally linked to actually drive the monsters.
And Australia gets its own national robot, which if anyone remembers the name was called Striker Eureka. And is piloted by two actors who I do not think are Australian.
No.
But
No, I think you're right. They're not Australian.
But finally, Sydney gets destroyed by a kaiju, which we've been waiting for years.
Oh, hang on. Final Wars, Sydney gets...
Oh, you're right too. I'm sorry.
Yeah,
Very,
that's
very true.
happened.
Very true.
Yes. Yeah. There you go, in the front row.
Yes, we've been corrected.
Sorry?
I'm pretty sure I've read your book.
Which monster movies?
Yeah, I've read it.
Oh, great. Thank you. It's hard to get now.
Yeah, I will get into audience questions in a minute. I want to bring it full circle. We talked about the 1998 film at the start briefly. However, I've read that it's not really considered an official Godzilla film, or at least that the monster in it is not actually meant to be Godzilla. Can we talk about that? Why is that?
So he's called now, at least Toho calls him Zilla. So they kind of have so they currently have the rights to that design, the Roland Emmerich design, the 1998 TriStar films. So, and is now kind of largely a bit of a punching bag especially in those 2000s kind of Godzilla films.
Yeah, but like I said, still has a place in the hearts of those who loved late 90s blockbuster films.
Yeah.
I think because then when 2014 rolled around, Toho was like on board. They're like, okay, he's a commodity. We will sell him appropriately, and then they sold him to Legendary Pictures in a deal that meant Toho couldn't release any of their own Godzilla films in the same year as a Legendary Pictures Godzilla film, which I thought was quite interesting. But I think it's like Toho just really wants to be in control of the portrayals to a degree. As we mentioned, there's loads of different parodies.
Well, this is the thing. It's a very, very popular, very income-generating asset.
Yeah,
this one,
do it. Be a Disney. Absolutely get the money. But
Exactly.
Yeah.
You don't
But what was wrong with him in the first place with the 1988 Godzilla? What did they get wrong that offended them so much?
He's too slender, as I said.
Okay.
People didn't
like
like.
booty.
He's too jacked. He's too muscular and lithe. Although I should say he's a woman. Gendered film.
Asexual?
because laser eggs.
Which leads us to the fabulous, I think, 99 animated spin-off, which we get the Godzilla that bursts out of an egg at the end. And we also get one, which is quite good in that movie. We get baby Godzillas running around doing the kind of raptor thing.
Oh, yes.
Because I always felt like Godzilla was a mammal, but anyway.
Maybe what are echidnas? The monotreme.
Oh, yes, that's right.
Godzilla monotreme, maybe.
Maybe. There was, I don't know whether anyone's seen a film, another film influenced by Godzilla called Q the Winged Serpent. Have you seen Q? Yeah. So that film, I actually got to talk to the director, Larry Cohen. He's passed away now, but he was, in very interesting interview because he did talk about how everyone's ripped him off. And he mentioned that Godzilla, the 1998 Godzilla, ripped him off because it copied Q laid eggs in the top of the Chrysler building. And he said they took that from, so having the egg laying in the Godzilla was from his idea.
The influence continues. It's like an Ouroboros. Like
it does exactly what you said, the informing back and forth as well, bringing icons together.
So everyone's mad at Roland Emmerich.
Everyone's mad. I'm mad at him for other reasons, but
But it made sense at the time because I think everything was, they wanted to make this disaster film where it's like small puny human against large outsized force of nature like a Twister or Independence Day, things we can't quite explain. And so obviously that's the tag. I think the different approach each movie takes really does reflect kind of what's going on in movie making at the time, and it makes sense to me that Emmerich made that film when he did, and it looks like that, and it has the triumphant conclusion because that's exactly what everyone else was doing.
Yeah, I don't know. I don't know why it gets so much hate. I've seen some of the films from the Heisei era, and they're quite shocking. So I don't know. But they're the Japanese ones. So
I think, as was just kind of mentioned then, I think one of the most remarkable things about, I mean, we all know that horror films and the horror genre and the disaster films, sci-fi films, often, are quite malleable as to what they speak to. Themes of the day, national themes, so have you. But if you watch the first Godzilla film, he could barely be any more restrained a metaphor for like nuclear annihilation, right? He's an atomic monster that pops up.
Yeah. It's not subtext, it's text.
Absolutely.
It's just there. Yeah.
And yet he's been remarkably kind of malleable in terms of what he kind of represents and stands for over time. You wouldn't think that a Japanese atomic lizard would find, or that people would find so many kind of diverse ways to make use of him.
Yeah.
In all sorts of both commercial and cultural settings as well, which I think speaks to, and I think it is because of that iconic design. Yeah. Like he sounds, he only sounds like Godzilla. He only looks like Godzilla. And, the more you change him, the kind of clearer it is that there's only kind of one core or key Godzilla. You rip him off and it never looks quite right.
I think as well it's something about him destroying major cities too. Like the fact that he's stomping on like a New York or a Tokyo, like it wouldn't really hit the same if it was like, I don't know, some small city. Because I think that's part of it is his size plus it just reminds us how everything we create can be destroyed so easily. And obviously some films hit harder than others in terms of, yeah, it's because you guys did this. You've created your own method of destruction. But I think that's what's so interesting is it's always Godzilla and a city, like they're a pair, an iconic duo, if you will.
It's Godzilla and modernity.
Yeah. Oh, nailed it.
If people were living in an agrarian way, Godzilla doesn't, when he's rampaging across the countryside, he's not causing too much trouble. He's making a bit of mess, but it's only once he gets to those dense urban centers that it's really a problem.
He also always avoids the Imperial Palace in Japan.
Oh, really?
Yep. Yeah. In every film, he'll never destroy the Imperial Palace, which I think it's just like a sign of respect to the emperor. But it's quite bizarre that it's in the middle of Tokyo, and like you'd have to go around it and be like, oh, okay, I'll leave that.
Talking about big monster movies, has anyone seen Burt I. Gordon films? Do you know Burt I. Gordon? Anyone? Okay. So he was known as Mr. Big, Burt I. Gordon, right? I think Forrest Ackerman, who was the editor of famous Monsters of Movieland, he actually called him that. But his first film came out in 1955. And it was called King Dinosaur, I think. And then he did
nice original name.
Yeah, and yes. And then he made things like The Amazing Colossal Man, Food of the Gods. he made a whole lot of things, but he was riffing on playing on the big creature thing, riding on the back of Godzilla's very big coattails. And he did things like, but he would do rear projection and superimposition of like big spiders on little models. But his models weren't quite as good as the ones that were in Godzilla's. So I would suggest if you wanted to have a bit of a hoot, you should be able to find them on YouTube. They're notoriously bad, but he made a lot of those films, a heap. And he only died last year and he was 100 years old. So
Wow.
yeah.
Okay. I'll look those up.
Monsters keep you young.
Yeah. All right. First audience question. The one at the very, very tippity top is, what's your favorite Godzilla design?
Shin Godzilla, 100%, 2016. And it's a bit of a cheat because Godzilla changes, I think, about 4 times in that film. But what I love about it is it's everything I want out of Godzilla. At various points, he has big googly eyes, like the original Godzilla. But by the end, he's quite frightening. So there are moments of humor in that movie. Godzilla's flopping along, like a fish out of water, down, streets, pushing cars out of the way. But then by the end, he's really genuinely frightening. He's got this cracked, kind of mottled, molten skin. His lasers cut through. I just love it.
I'm the same as, I have to say, boringly, I'm the same as him. It's just because I think that because it shows an evolution too.
Yeah.
The idea in the monster design changes. It kind of, that's like referencing the larger canon of Godzilla.
I totally agree. I love the like tadpole Godzilla, the slimy one with the huge goggly eyes, and then
I
by the
hate
end,
him.
He's just
so
squirting
scary.
goo out for no reason as he kind of waddles along.
foul, and I love him deeply. Like, I think, and then it's kind of the vulnerability. It's like whenever Godzilla shows some vulnerability, you're like, he's just out here doing his thing. Like, it's not his fault.
And in the end, we get like a hint of, I wish they do a Shin Godzilla 2, we get a hint of some sort of humanoid race of Godzilla lizard men or something like that as the final shot. Oh,
Yeah.
what a wonder of design.
I know. I'm going to say Godzilla -1. Obviously, it won the Academy Award for VFX, so it's probably an easy one to pick. But I like that it's, number one, it's an upgrade of the original design, and it looks amazing. Number two is that when the director was working on the film and like sort of bringing home, I think it was either storyboards or rushes, I think his wife said, "Oh, he looks like our cat." When he's looking at the planes and
He has
following
quite a
them.
feline.
He's very
he's like a cat, and so like he incorporated that. He like lent into the cat likeness, and I love that because I love cats. And now I watch all the Godzilla films, and I think, like you got those eyes that like follow things around, and the tail that's whipping.
Does anyone have a Catzilla T-shirt? I've seen literally 2 of those around in the last week, so it's a thing at the moment.
I think there's a lot of crossover between Godzilla people and cat people.
Yeah.
I don't know what it is, but yes.
I think it's the teeth. And also, so we were talking about how does Godzilla go from something that's terrifying to something that's cute and makes us want to like have a plushie or a toy. For me personally, I think it is that cat likeness. And before I even sort of consciously thought of it, there must have been something deep in my subconscious making me think like, oh, this is like a cute little creature that could bite me and could cause destruction. Like my cats over the years have like scratched me and scarred me, but I love them. I just I'm like, it's not your fault.
Wild animal in
You're
the
just-
house.
Yeah, you're fine. Like I'll forgive you anything, and I feel like I would be like that with Godzilla in real life.
I think Godzilla has also become, because and we touched on this, as the defender as well, so not just the destroyer. The Colossal plays really well with that idea, because you see the kaiju over the city, and then you see what she's doing in her world in America and how that's being mirrored, and it's things like scratching in the head and the movements and just pulling like with a sack over her back, carrying stuff along, and the monsters mimicking that, and it kind of gives you an extra dimension, like what is really the motivation here? What is that monster really feeling? And if you look at Godzilla, he would be in pain. He's been reanimated basically through nuclear weaponry. He wouldn't be feeling so great. He looks uncomfortable. He's not in.
He's got a sore tummy.
He's got a sore tummy, and he needs to do a big poo. because he's got a big and he's basically, he doesn't usually live on Earth, you know, he's not on the ground. So that was a part of the host as well that Bong Joon-ho talked about a lot, this idea of this monster being so uncomfortable, and therefore that's part of what's fueling his demeanour.
And then little military planes just peppering his face. And then whenever, you know, he's like swatting them away. I'm like, I would do that. Of course you would do
they're
that.
like flies.
And you start to
annoying.
be like, well, you know, any of us could be Godzilla.
I relate to that though. He has like a penguin-like characteristic, right? In the water, he's graceful. He moves smoothly, and on land, he kind of wobbles about.
it's so
I relate
true,
to him
yeah.
as a lover of swimming in the pool. So
So very quick last question. We got 3 minutes. Regarding the collaboration and crossovers, what sort of crossover would you like to see next? Like, what sort of IP, franchise, or character would you like to see Godzilla fighting against or fighting with? Or maybe it's like an ad or something that you want to see.
Such a
Godzilla
good
in.
question.
Yeah.
That-
Where should he go next?
That's something that
I'd honestly like to see, and I think this is actually the plan for the next crossover in the legendary films, is a film that really focuses still with Kong and Godzilla, who I think are realized really, really lovely, but that focuses more on Godzilla, because those films have had a much more of a focus on the kind of anthropomorphized, more human-looking Kong, who I guess is easier to write. You can understand him. He can communicate. He uses sign language. And Godzilla has always been a little bit of a second fiddle, or a kind of a chaos agent in those films. So I'd be really excited to just still see those same two either collaborating or fighting or what have you, but with a greater focus on Godzilla's kind of everyday movements and motivations and wants.
Yeah.
Last we saw him, I think he was having a snooze in the Colosseum. So
Yeah.
Or are there any kaiju that have already been introduced in his world that you'd like to see brought back? There are a lot of Showa era kaiju that haven't been touched for a long time.
I always like seeing, I think there's a lot of room for some really cool designs of like Mothra. I think
Yes.
some more Mothra would be amazing, especially, I mean, Mothra is very much included, but I think there's a lot that could be done. Very cool design. I would buy those collectibles. Yeah, I think that's one of sort of Godzilla's associates that I would love to keep seeing more of.
I like you describing him as an associate, like he's a work colleague.
Yeah.
Yeah, like they just see each other at work. Otherwise,
My business associates.
Has
Ghidra.
Godzilla ever been, because I know they're from different studios, but been in the same film with Gamera?
No.
So it's never going to happen.
Someone's
'cause,
knowledgeable.
yeah, unless we
I
can
mean,
get
never
the
say
right
never.
business people together to
Yeah.
do the
a
right
multiverse
deal.
of sorts.
Yeah,
Try and
yeah.
get that going.
I'd like to see that.
Yeah, I'd like to see a high budget prestige Gamera.
Yes.
I would actually like to see Bong Joon-ho actually do like a Godzilla straight up movie. That would be pretty cool.
Yep. And I would like to see a Godzilla musical. And I think that's where we'll end it.
You get the final say.
Can everyone please thank Emma, Andrew, and Megan? Thank you for joining me, and thank you for your great questions. Yeah, we're going to have a break and then return in half an hour, I think, to the next one, which is Building Godzilla, talking about suitmation, VFX, the lot. So hopefully I'll see you all back then. But yes,
Thank you so
Have a
much,
good break.
everyone.
Thank you.